The Republic went to war with an army it never voted for, never fully understood, and never asked the right questions about. That army was built to destroy it, not as an accident, not as a failure of planning, but as the plan. The timing was engineered, the loyalty was conditional in a way that almost no one in the chain of command understood, and the planet that built it had been operational for a decade before the first Senate session even acknowledged the war had started. This is the full account of how it happened, from the erased star chart that should have been the first warning, to the inhibitor chips that made Order 66 possible, to the soldiers who refused to be only what they were built to be. Every chapter of this story is a record of what gets produced when a civilization commissions something it never fully intends to examine. Chapter 1. The Hidden Planet. Kamino does not appear in the Jedi archives, not because the records are incomplete or the data is difficult to find, but because someone removed it. Star system exists, the gravitational data of the surrounding system confirms something massive should occupy that region of space, and yet, the Jedi Archives, the most comprehensive repository of knowledge in the galaxy, contain no entry for Kamino. When Obi-Wan Kenobi traces the saber dart from Attack of the Clones to its origin and arrives at this gap, Jocasta Nu concludes that if it does not appear in the archives, it does not exist. Obi-Wan's conclusion, which turns out to be correct, is that something was erased. The erasure traces back to Jedi Master Sifo Dyas, who had been warning the Jedi Council for years that a great conflict was coming and that the Republic would need a military force to survive it. The Council rejected his arguments, and Sifo Dyas, acting without Council authority and without Senate knowledge or approval, contacted the Kaminoans and placed the order himself. Then, he was killed. Arranged by Darth Tyrannus, the Sith Lord the galaxy knew, as Count Dooku, who stepped in to manage the project and inserted the inhibitor chip program into the cloning process before the first template scan was taken. The Republic had no idea the army being built in its name had been compromised at the source before a single clone was decanted. An army ordered by a dead man, managed by a Sith Lord, built on a planet no one was supposed to find. That is what the Republic sent its generals to command. The Kaminoans themselves tell the other half of this story. By the time Obi-Wan arrives for his inspection, Prime Minister Lama Su discusses the clone army with the flat professional pride of a manufacturer reviewing a production line. The growth acceleration, the behavioral conditioning, the combat training, the obedience enhancement, all of it presented as quality control rather than anything requiring moral examination. The Kaminoans built it with expertise and enthusiasm. What happened to the product after delivery was not, by their accounting, their concern. This army was compromised before it existed. The planet that built it never considered that a problem. Chapter 2. What they built. The Kaminoans called it a product. What they were actually building was a population of human beings with a kill switch none of them knew about. The template was Jango Fett, a Mandalorian bounty hunter selected by Darth Tyrannus for reasons that went beyond simple competence. Jango was skilled, one of the most capable fighters of his era, but the selection was also ideological. The Mandalorian warrior tradition carried within it an entire cultural framework around combat, discipline, and the acceptance of death as an occupational condition. A template who embodied that framework would produce soldiers who arrived already oriented towards exactly the kind of life they were being designed to live. Growth acceleration pushed the clones to full physical maturity in a decade rather than two. Not an unfortunate side effect, but a central feature of the specification. The Republic needed an army quickly, and the Kaminoans solved the inconvenience of standard human development timelines by engineering it away. With full knowledge that they were producing beings who would be old men in their 30s and dead before what the broader galaxy would consider late middle age. They knew. They built it that way anyway. In Legends, the Republic Commando series documents a training program run by the Quival Dar, a group of 100 Mandalorian warriors recruited by Jango to instill warrior culture directly into the clones' upbringing. This was not just tactical training, but identity formation, giving the clones language, values, and a sense of belonging designed to make them excellent soldiers. What the Kaminoans had not fully accounted for was that this process also created the foundation for the individuality they would later spend considerable effort trying to contain. The inhibitor chip was the final layer, a biologically embedded device in every clone's brain, presented to the Jedi Order as a safeguard against clone aggression, documented in the Clone Wars Season 6. When activated by a specific command, it would override the clone's conscious will entirely, not degrade it, not redirect it, override it. The Kaminoans knew what it did. The Jedi were told something else entirely. This wasn't loyalty, it was design, and one piece of that design was never disclosed to the people who would be commanding it. Chapter 3. The Jedi Blind Spot. The Jedi Order accepted the clone army at Geonosis. That is the failure, not the absence of suspicion, not a deficit of intelligence, the acceptance itself, without the examination that acceptance required. Reservation existed. Mace Windu's discomfort is visible in Attack of the Clones. Yoda's line after the battle, that victory it was, but clouded the future remained, is not the statement of a leader who feels uncomplicated triumph. Several Jedi across the Clone Wars series express serious unease about their role as generals of an army they did not choose. But reservation is not refusal, and the Jedi's failure was not primarily one of suspicion, but of examination. They took the army because the alternative was watching the Separatists destroy the Republic and everyone they were sworn to protect. That was a real consideration, and it was not wrong. It was also exactly the kind of pressure the plan had been designed to create. The structural trap was this: a general who examines their troops as engineered products rather than soldiers cannot command those troops effectively. The Jedi who built genuine relationships with their clones, who knew their names, recognized their individual traits, trusted them across hundreds of engagements, were also the Jedi most exposed when Order 66 activated. Closeness that made the Jedi-clone partnership so effective in combat was the same closeness that made the betrayal so complete. The chip did not care about their relationship. When the command came, it performed its function regardless of what had been built before it. The specific moment that encapsulates this most precisely is the Fives arc in the Clone Wars Season 6. Fives discovers the inhibitor chip program, removes his own chip, and attempts to warn the Jedi Order. He gets close enough that Palpatine has to intervene personally, meeting with Fives alone, administering a drug to make his subsequent behavior erratic enough to be dismissed as paranoia, framing the truth as the delusion of a malfunctioning clone. Shaak Ti, who had more direct experience with the clones than almost any other Jedi, investigates and accepts the cover. The warning was real, and the system absorbed it. In Legends, the Republic Commando series adds an institutional layer. The clones existed in a legal gray area the Republic never formally resolved. No right to resign, no meaningful retirement, no legal standing outside their military function. The Jedi had the moral authority to challenge this arrangement. They never mounted a formal objection. The war was ongoing. The objection could wait. They cared about the clones. That is exactly why they failed. Caring about individuals is easier than questioning the system that produces them, and that gap between personal decency and institutional accountability was where the plan lived. Chapter 4. They became people. The Kaminoans built the clone army to produce reliable, interchangeable instruments. What they actually produced was a population of human beings, and that distinction is not incidental to the story. It is the mechanism that made Order 66 as catastrophic as it was. The individuality expressed itself in every way the conditioning had failed to engineer away. The clone designations were numerical, but the clones themselves used nicknames given to each other through shared experience. Rex, Cody, Fives, Echo, Hardcase, Waxer, Boyle. None of them official, all of them the product of a human impulse towards identity that 3 years of accelerated training had narrowed but could not eliminate. Clone troopers collected things, formed preferences, grieved specific losses, maintained friendships across deployments and reassignments with the specificity of people who understood exactly how replaceable they were considered to be and refused to treat themselves that way. Clone Wars series documents what this looked like in practice. Waxer memorized the name of a child on Ryloth and carried it. The 501st developed tactical opinions that diverged from standard doctrine and argued for them. Domino Squad failed their evaluation not because they lacked capability, but because they had not yet learned to function as a unit, which is to say, they were still learning. the way people learn, rather than performing as specified. The Kaminoans saw this and called it behavioral variance. The clones saw it and called it being alive. Every bond the clones formed made Order 66 more devastating, not less. Every Jedi who knew a clone by name, every clone who had served alongside a Jedi through 3 years of combat, every relationship built across hundreds of shared engagements, all of it became the specific content of the betrayal when the chip activated. The more human the clones became, the more complete the collapse of everything the Republic had built its war effort around. The Kaminoans had designed instruments, the instruments had become people, and Palpatine had designed Order 66 to use both facts simultaneously. The Bad Batch represent the outer limit of this logic. Clone Force 99, Hunter, Wrecker, Tech, Crosshair, and Echo were individuals whose combination of enhanced capabilities and distinct personalities made them extraordinarily effective in the field and impossible to treat as interchangeable. And Omega, the unmodified female clone who exists outside the weapon function entirely, is what results when you remove every military purpose from a Kaminoan creation and ask what remains. What remains is a person. The more human they became, the more catastrophic Order 66 would be. The system had been built to use that against them. Chapter 5. Built to Betray. The Clone Wars did not lead to Order 66, they enabled it. The full architecture of how Palpatine engineered the clone army into the Republic's executioner requires holding several threads simultaneously. The commissioning through Sifo-Dyas and then Tyrannus was the foundation. The inhibitor chip, inserted into the cloning process before the first batch was decanted, was the mechanism. The sustained management of a galactic war that he was running from both sides simultaneously, as Supreme Chancellor directing the Republic and as Darth Sidious directing the Separatists, was the operational layer that kept the Jedi dependent on the clone army and prevented any pause long enough for real examination. The Fives arc in the Clone Wars Season 6 is the closest the timeline comes to documenting how this nearly unraveled. Tup, a trooper in the 501st, experiences a premature chip activation at Ringo Vinda and kills Jedi General Tiplar without a triggering order, and the anomaly draws attention. Fives refuses to accept the Kaminoan explanation, tumor, malfunction, defect, and begins his own investigation, removes his own chip, and discovers that the device is present in every clone and does exactly what it was designed to do. He gets to Palpatine, who meets with him alone and administers a drug that makes Fives' subsequent testimony erratic enough to be dismissed as chip malfunction. He is killed by a clone shock trooper before the examination can happen. What Fives found was true. What happened to that truth illustrates the precision of the preparation. The warning system had been neutralized by the same hand that had built the thing the warning was about. Rex's partial resistance in the Clone Wars Season 7 is the most specific documentation of what the chip actually did. Ahsoka removes his chip just after Order 66 activated. Rex, with his chip removed, is himself, the man who had spent years building genuine relationships with the Jedi he served. Rex, with his chip intact while the order was being given, would have continued to be something else entirely, a version of himself that retained every capability and operated completely outside his own will. In Legends, the mechanism is psychological conditioning rather than a biological implant, but the outcome in both continuities is the same. The kill switch was in place before the weapon was ever deployed. War didn't lead to Order 66, it enabled it. 3 years of dependency, trust, and irreplaceable relationships, all of it leveraged for the moment Palpatine chose to use it. Chapter 6. The Night It Happened. Order 66 executed across the galaxy in a matter of hours. Revenge of the Sith documents the scale of it in a sequence that cuts between engagements with the brevity of a ledger. Ki-Adi-Mundi on Mygeeto, Isla Secura on Felucia, Plo Koon above Cato Neimoidia, Tas Ali on Salukami. Each scene is seconds long. A few frames of Jedi dying, clones firing, and then the next. And the brevity is exactly the point. 3 years of partnerships, 3 years of combat alongside people who had trusted them with their lives, ended in moments without ceremony and without recognition of what was being destroyed. The handful who survived did so by specific accident rather than design. Obi-Wan fell into water a moment before Cody's shot could confirm the kill. Yoda's recognition to the Force gave him a fraction of a second's warning. Enough. Ahsoka, on the other hand, got lucky that Rex was strong enough to resist Order 66 for long enough to remove the chip, which meant the one closest to her was also the only clone in the operation who had a choice about what to do next. Kanan Jarrus was a Padawan whose master sacrificed herself to give him more time to run. In every case, the margin was specific, unrepeatable, and available to almost no one else in the galaxy that night. What the chip produced in clones who executed the order is visible most clearly in Rex. Rex, despite having the chip in him when Order 66 was activated, managed to resist attacking Ahsoka through sheer will long enough for her to remove his chip. He then immediately fought to protect her. Had they taken any longer, he likely would have killed her. The same man, the same memories, the same relationships, the same 3 years of earned loyalty, all of it rendered irrelevant by a device installed before he was born by a man he had never met. That is what the Kaminoans had placed in every clone in the army. Not a soldier who might turn, a soldier who would, when the moment came, turn completely. 3 years of the Republic's war effort ended in seconds. What it had been built on, the trust, the partnerships, the relationships the Jedi had formed with the people fighting beside them, turned out to be the thing that made the collapse so total. Chapter 7. The System That Failed. Every institution in the chain made choices that were, in isolation, defensible. The Kaminoans built what they were paid to build. The Senate accepted an army it had not commissioned because the alternative was watching the Separatists win. The Jedi took command because someone had to, and because the relationships they built with the clones were real and mattered, and were also, by design, exactly the vulnerability Palpatine needed. Each choice followed from the one before it. Each institution handed the problem to the next. None of them stopped. The Kaminoans are the clearest illustration of where that logic ends. They tracked behavioral variance in the clone population, euthanized those they considered defective, and presented the inhibitor chip to the Jedi as something it was not. Their professional pride in the quality of the product did not extend to examining the ethics of the product's existence. They defined their obligations by the terms of the contract, and the contract did not include a line about what the beings produced were owed when the war was over. In the Legends Republic Commando series, Jedi like Etain Tur-Mukin and Arligan Zay did ask the questions about the clones' legal standing, their rights, what the Republic owed the people fighting its war. The institutional response was to manage their concerns rather than address them. The inquiry was routed around. The machine kept moving. The clones themselves are the only element of this history that comes out on the right side of it. Built to be instruments, they became people. Designed to be obedient, they developed judgment. Engineered to be temporary, they formed relationships that outlasted the war. The Republic, the Kaminoan production system, and in some cases, the Empire itself. The Bad Batch survived, Rex survived, Echo survived, Omega survived. The story does not end with Order 66. It continues in every clone who carried their humanity through a system designed to make humanity inconvenient and found, on the other side, that the system had not taken everything. Kamino itself was eventually destroyed by the Empire it had served, as documented in the Bad Batch. The planet that had survived its own near extinction by becoming the best in the galaxy at manufacturing expendable life was, in the end, treated as expendable. The Empire had what it needed, and the contract was concluded. The Republic commissioned its own end and called it protection. The clones built for that purpose refused, in every way available to them, to be only that. That distinction between what a system intends and what the people inside it become is the only thing in this history worth calling a victory. The galaxy remembers the Clone Wars as the Republic's final chapter, 3 years of conflict that ended with the Jedi destroyed, the Senate dissolved, and an empire rising from what remained. That account is inaccurate and incomplete, because it treats the clone army as backdrop rather than subject. The clones were not extras in the Republic's final chapter. They were the mechanism of it, built by a planet that treated life as a manufacturing problem, commissioned by a dead man whose warning had been ignored, weaponized by a Sith Lord who understood that the most reliable way to destroy an institution is to get that institution to build its own destroyer and trust it with everything. The outcome could have been different at multiple points if different choices had been made. What the history makes clear is what it cost to make the choices that were made, and what it cost the people who had no choices at all. The clones did not choose Order 66. The Republic did not choose to fall, but somewhere between those two facts is the truth about what happens when a civilization stops asking the questions that feel too expensive to answer. The clones were only one part of what the Republic built without fully understanding what it was building. The same pattern runs through the rest of this era, the same institutional blindness, the same failure to examine what was being constructed until it was too late to stop doing it. That story continues on the channel, and the links are below.